Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin May. I am with the City of Charlotte's Planning Department on the UDO team. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today to join us for one of our virtual updates regarding the second draft of the UDO. We've got just a few introductory and logistical slides before we get kind of into the substantive piece of today's talk and discussion, which focuses on the highlights of the key changes to the second draft. Next slide, please. So for today, we do have a presentation which we'll be sharing with you. During the presentation, please at any time enter some comments or questions into the chat box so that we may see it. We'll also be recording these for input into our public comment portal. We will do the very best that we can to answer and respond to these questions as they are submitted. However, if we do not have the ability to answer those questions in the flow of the presentation with the other staff that are on our call today, we will have time at the end of the presentation to circle back and address those comments, as well as address any comments and questions that were submitted by you attending today during the registration process. Next. So, as I mentioned earlier, the topic for today's meeting is to present and discuss the second draft of the UDO. This draft is also known as our public hearing draft, which was released a couple of weeks ago on Friday, June 3rd. The full Redlined second draft is available on the charlotteudo.org website. Specifically today, we'll be talking about the review and adoption timeline and key dates for the UDO project, as well as how the public can have their input and what the schedule for that public input and engagement process looks like, as well as I mentioned key changes that have taken place from the first draft to this second draft. Next.
Yep. Sorry. There we go.
It's all right. So with regard to the public input process, public input and engagement process and schedule, we opened another public comment portal on the second draft of the UDO on the same day that we released the second draft on Friday, June 3rd. We have several public engagement opportunities from now through June 30th. Of course, today is one of our engagement opportunities. We'll be having another virtual update session regarding the second draft on this coming Thursday. Tomorrow, if you have the availability and are so inclined, please feel free to visit us at the Government Center. From about 2:30 on, we will be having an open house for which we will have some staff from different topic areas there available to answer questions for different areas that you may have questions about in the UDO. And next week and in the week following, we will also have some UDO virtual office hours wherein you can sign up and register as you did for today's session for the different topic areas of the UDO that you may have some specific questions that you'd like to drill down deeper into or make a comment on. Also, I mentioned the public comment portal. UDO staff will be responding to feedback as received and try to identify themes through that portal for which we will compile packets for the City Council and Planning Committee for their review during deliberation and consideration of the UDO recommendation and adoption. As far as timeline for our public input process and engagement, as I mentioned, the second draft was released on June 30th. Today, we begin our virtual update sessions. As I said, we've got another one coming up on Thursday. Tomorrow is the open house, as I mentioned, at the Government Center. As you can see in the middle of this slide is reflected those virtual office hour sessions that are going to be offered starting next week. The public comment portal again closes on June 30th this month, and you can see here very much some keystone dates towards the end of this timeline. On July 11th, there will be a public hearing with the City Council on the second draft of the UDO. That will also take place with the Planning Committee of the Planning Commission on July 19th. The team will seek a Planning Committee recommendation on the UDO with an anticipated City Council decision on the UDO, currently scheduled for August 22nd. To give you a little bit of the context of the UDO project, We have been at this since, well, the update of the second draft since the first draft was released in October 2021. To date, or through that first phase, we had over 1,200 comments from community members and stakeholders. We received multiple rounds of input from the City Council and the Planning Commission. We engaged our Unified Development Ordinance Advisory Commission, to which they reviewed and provided us additional comments. And then from our teams across different departments of the city and county, we also reviewed and received 600 comments. The second draft of the UDO builds off that first draft we released last year and includes new and updated concepts and approaches that's important for you to review. Next. So if anybody's not familiar with how a redlined draft will work, just a very explanatory slide that'll show you that as you review the second draft of the UDO, text markups will illustrate where items have been added, which will be shown as blue underlined text, or removed, which will show as red with a strike through for those omissions. And I think with that, I will turn it over to Alan Goodwin, who will present to you some of the key update areas and take you through the rest of the presentation today. Alan?
Thanks, Kevin. We're going to talk about a few areas today where significant changes or impactful changes have been made from the first draft of the UDO to the second. And I won't read this entire list because we're going to cover all of these in the coming slides. We have other areas that we have made some impactful changes, and we're going to cover the remainder on Thursday's virtual conversations, which will again be held from noon to 1 and again from 6 to 7 p.m. So let's dig into this list. The first thing I want to talk about is that we have added a fourth campus zoning district. As you may know, we have a place type from the policy map that has been done in conjunction with the comprehensive plan that has identified some areas as campus place types. And the first version of the UDO had 3 campus place types. The second draft has added a new campus place type, the research campus, which will be abbreviated as RC1. And it is intended to address the needs and impacts of large-scale research campuses within a mixed-use environment. The proposed mix of uses allowed in the research campus district is not specifically allowed in either of the other 3 campus zoning districts. This district is characterized by development of taller structures within a pedestrian-oriented environment. We added this district based on the feedback we received, and it would be applied in areas such as the University Research Park. The next thing we want to talk about is the sidewall height restriction that is in our current neighborhood 1 zoning districts, as well as our residential infill zoning district. The purpose of restricting the sidewall height for new infill development in residential areas, neighborhood 1 residential areas, is to try to ensure that new development fits with the character and height and scale of the surrounding neighborhood. And in the first draft, it proposed to limit the sidewall height to 12 feet. And I know these illustrations are, you can't read the all of the small print, but they are in the second draft redline version. So if you go into the neighborhood 1 zoning district, you can see this graphic in full scale and you'll be able to see what it says. But essentially, the sidewall height of new infill dwellings would be limited to either 12 feet, or if the average sidewall height of the dwellings on either side of the new infill dwelling was taller than 12 feet, you could average the sidewall height of those 2 surrounding buildings, and then your sidewall height may increase to that average, just as long as you stayed within the maximum height of your zoning district. It was felt that the 12-foot minimum was too little, or maximum rather, the 12-foot maximum was too little to allow for two-story duplexes and triplexes in lower density neighborhoods, which would be allowed under the neighborhood 1 zoning districts in the UDO. So we are proposing to increase that 12-foot maximum sidewall height to 20 feet. And you'll see that increase in the second draft. And we've also carried that 20-foot, proposed 20-foot maximum sidewall height into the residential infill overlay district as well. The next thing let's talk about is a new type of historic district for Charlotte. We do have a historic district overlay currently, and we have several historic districts in the city. This is a new district, historic district overlay called the Streetside Historic District. And it differs from our traditional historic districts in that it only regulates the first 50% of buildings or properties, the first half of the street-facing side of buildings and properties, so that we can try to preserve the character of a street while allowing changes in the rear of the property or the rear of the building. So how this would work, and again, this is a new concept for Charlotte, although some other communities are using this type of street side historic district, is that the first half, the first street-facing half of the property would be subject to the regulations of the typical historical district. But for the back half of the property, you would be able to do renovations or additions without having the restrictions of the historic district overlay. Next, let's talk about height transition, and specifically, we're talking about how new development that is next to a residential use in a neighborhood 1 place type, such as a single family home or duplex, how new development that is being built next to it would transition in terms of height. The first draft of the UDO would have allowed for maximum height of 65 feet for the new development within the first 200 feet of the property line for that neighborhood 1 place type. And then after 200 feet, the development could be as tall as the zoning district would allow, the zoning district that the new development is being built under. So essentially, you could have a 65-foot tall building fairly close to the lot line of that neighborhood 1 place type. The second draft, we've modified that height transition so that for the first 100 feet of distance from the neighborhood 1 lot line, new development could reach a height of only 50 feet. And then after 100 feet, it could rise in height to 65 feet. And then once you've, and that would go for the next 100-foot distance. And then after that, so essentially after 200 feet, the same as in the first example, the building or development could go as tall as the zoning district would allow. And this essentially gives a little bit of a stair step in height and a little more gentle transition from the new development to the lower density residential. So we've also increased the maximum height in several districts from the first draft to the second draft. Most of these height increases are in our centers districts, like neighborhood center, community activity center, regional activity center, and so forth. Also, we've increased the maximum height that can be achieved with the bonus menu. We'll talk about the bonus a little bit later. So the height increases that we have proposed in the second draft can be fairly minor, like 5 feet up to as much as 50 feet, depending on the district. We've also reduced the minimum building height in our neighborhood center district to reflect that it is a less intense centers district as compared with the others. So in the first draft, the minimum building height in the NC district was 24 feet. We are proposing to reduce that to 16 feet. One area that of the first draft of the UDO that received probably more comment and conversation than any other was short-term rental regulations that were proposed in the first draft. By short-term rental, we mean things like Airbnb and Vrbo, where people will rent their property or a portion of it for short-term rental. Based on a lawsuit that was filed in Wilmington, and as well as anticipating that there may be state legislation enacted regarding the regulation of short-term rentals, the city attorney's office has advised that we not include any short-term rental regulations in the UDO at this time. We will continue to monitor activities and any proposed legislation at the state level on short-term rentals. And once we can get some clear legal advice from our attorney's office, we may and likely will try to include some future regulation of short-term rentals at a future date. I mentioned the bonus menu, and if you're not familiar with it, it's something we've been using in our transit-oriented development districts for 2 or 3 years now. And it allows for an increase in either building height or in some cases a reduction of required open space in exchange for the development providing some community benefits that have been identified, typically affordable housing, but others as well. We've expanded the availability of bonus options from the TOD districts to several other zoning districts in the draft UDO. But from the first draft to the second, we have also expanded the menu of options available to include things like providing affordable housing at 60% of area median income. Previously in the bonus menu, you could provide affordable housing at 80% of area median income and earn bonus points, and you can still do that, but there's a new option for providing it at a lower percentage of AMI and earning more bonus points. Also, we're including the option of electric vehicle charging stations over and above what the UDO may require. You could earn additional bonus points for that, as well as for multimodal transportation mitigation and transportation demand management, TDM. You may hear that term used occasionally, mitigation, TDM mitigation. We think that these new options will give properties more opportunities to use the bonus menu and advance some city priorities, such as providing affordable housing at lower AMI thresholds, as well as meeting some of our city goals and some of our adopted plans, like the Strategic Energy Action Plan and the Strategic Mobility Plan. Speaking of affordable housing, we've also got a new option in the second draft of the UDO that provides incentives for the development of affordable housing. And in exchange for the development of affordable housing, you may be able to utilize standards of a different zoning district or adjust the requirement to build streets. Also get reimbursed for any required sidewalks along public streets, and have alternative standards available to you for green area, formerly known as tree save, as well as heritage trees. We are working with the Housing and Neighborhood Services Department on setting thresholds for affordability, and we're going to be going to our city council later this month with those new thresholds. That concludes the topic areas that we're going to cover in today's session. And I see that I'm not seeing anything in chat, although Kevin has put into chat the topics that we'll cover on Thursday's virtual conversation. So if you're interested in any of the topics that Kevin has put in the chat, we encourage you to, if you haven't already done so, to pre-register for one of our 2 Thursday sessions, virtual sessions.
Yeah, excuse me. Thanks, Alan. I think what we'll do is we'll pivot. As I'm pulling up the registration information, we do have a question input into chat from Will Lovett asking, when will the UDO actually go into effect?
And we're thinking, Will and others, that our current thinking is that it will go into effect 9 months after adoption. Currently, the City Council is scheduled to vote on the UDO on August 22nd, which would put 9 months at May 22nd. We've talked about making it June 1st, just to have it start on the first day of the month. So it's possible that it will either be late May or June 1st. That will allow for
June 1st.
June 1st. Okay, thanks, Laura. And that will allow for people to plan ahead and either try to get development plans in under the current regulations or at least know when the UDO would go into effect so that they can plan accordingly.
Thank you, Alan. And we'll pivot to the questions submitted during registration. And Kay Doyle George, I do see that you put a question into the chat that is essentially the same as what you put during the registration process. So I want to recognize and say that I see you, and we will get to that. We've got a few questions that were submitted during registration prior. So we will circle back to you, Kay Doyle George, for an answer to your question. The next question, Alan, comes from Patrick Bugas, and please forgive me if I'm butchering that. And Patrick, I don't know if you're on with us, but his question is does the site plan approval process for Todd UC projects take into account the presence of next door residential, such as townhome uses?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I completely understand the question. Laura, have you had a chance to look at that? Well,
I think Patrick is on with us, and Patrick B, I think this is you. I'm going to ask you to unmute, and if this is you, if you could add some additional context, that'd be great.
Yeah, there was two kind of questions involved in that. So first off, I noticed there's a lot of focus on neighborhood 1 place types, but in around where a lot of TOD is, there's actually not a lot neighborhood 1. There's just a lot of residential use, so such as townhomes. And so it just doesn't seem, TOD is just so wide span, such a wide span of uses. Why in the UDO don't they cover residential use and just focus on neighborhood 1 place type? And 2, in the actual site plan approval process, so I think that's the planning team or land use team or whatnot, do they take into account when looking at proposed site plans the fact that next door there might be townhomes or residential uses, or do they have to approve anything that is purely within this UDO's language?
So for the site plan approval process, they are looking at the regulations in the UDO and any other regulations that may be outside of state and federal regulations. So they would approve, if they're not going through a conditional rezoning, is the only place where we have maybe some additional limitations. But we have worked to design the UDO so that you could take something more frequently to conventional zoning. I think the reason we don't use general residential throughout is you're going to have a lot of residential that may be zoned TOD. And so what we do have is, and I was trying to look up the landscape buffer requirements. We have those kind of requirements, and maybe Alan could take a look at those and let folks know. The height transition is maybe what you're talking about, that refers directly to the neighborhood 1 place type. And we think that because of that transition, that is really the place that we think that a height transition is most appropriate. Alan, do you have anything on the landscape yard?
I'm calling it up now. So if for a TOD development abutting a neighborhood one place type, there would be a Class B landscape yard required, as well as a neighborhood two landscape yard. And let me just, sorry, I'm trying to.
Yeah, I guess just for a little bit more context, for townhomes that already exist in areas that were blanket rezoned as part of, for example, South End's TOD blanket rezoning,
Yes.
There's townhomes there that now with TOD and the UDO, there's just no requirements. You can have 15-story, 300-foot tall buildings with zero side yard, zero landscape requirements because it's in TOD, even though it's next door to a residential use. And they can, so that's kind of where the question's coming from. Why is there there's no protection for residential uses that are in TOD areas that already exist?
Well, there should have been at least a landscape buffer for new TOD, even in our current ordinance. It's been a while since I've looked at that, but I'm fairly certain about that.
There isn't if they're zoned TOD, and I think that is the rub. And the ordinance does reflect that if you're outside of the center, but if you're in that type of area, that is a transit station area, I think the expectation is going to be that there is intense development in that area. It's really when you're outside of that neighborhood center that's probably the way that is mapped. Well, probably not neighborhood center, probably a community or regional center. When you're outside of that is where the transition you'd expect to be greater. But that is the way that TOD was initially developed in 2019. And we are planning on proposing to carry that forward.
Okay. All right, Kevin, I'm looking at Doyle George's first comment, and I can take that. Please explain how minimum lot areas for neighborhood 1A through N1F limit density, you increase maximum building coverage in the second draft. Yes. Unlike the current zoning ordinance, which limits residential density to a certain number of units per acre, the UDO on neighborhood 1 zoning districts have no such restriction on density, but tries to regulate density by minimum lot size depending on the district, as well as setbacks, height, and minimum, or rather maximum building coverage. So our minimum lot areas for the N1A through N1E districts generally mimic the current residential R3, R4, R5, R6 minimum lot sizes. The difference is that in the UDO, in keeping with the adopted policy of the comprehensive plan, development in any of those neighborhood 1 zoning districts could either be a single family dwelling or a duplex or a triplex. Our current residential districts in the current zoning ordinance, you're pretty much limited to single family with some exceptions for duplexes on corner lots. The second part of that question is that yes, from the first draft to the second draft, we did increase the maximum building coverage across the board. For one, we simplified it so there aren't as many categories of lot size that we prescribed a particular maximum building coverage. So in the second draft, we only have divided into 2 categories, either lots of 10,000 square feet or greater, or lots that are less than 10,000 square feet. So we've increased the maximum building coverage for lots of 10,000 square feet or greater from 35 to 45 to 40% of the lot. And for lots less than 10,000 square feet, it is 50% maximum building coverage across the board. We were just butting up. The reason I think is that we were getting feedback that our maximum lot coverage did not allow for duplexes and triplexes, which may have a larger footprint, and especially on smaller lots. If you factor in your needs for parking and driveway access and others, that we just needed to have we needed to increase that maximum building coverage to accommodate what we anticipate will be needed for those new types of dwellings.
Alan, if I could also just reiterate, I think we've talked about this in previous meetings, that the lot sizes, the way they are now, being consistent for single family, duplex, triplex, in a zoning district is consistent with policy 2.1 in the council adopted 2040 comprehensive plan. And so the intent out of the comprehensive plan is anywhere that you would allow a single family detached home, do you think that you would be able to also put in a duplex or triplex? And then I'm looking at, do you think, I was looking at the, sorry, reading that comment out loud, that in 1E, in certain places, if you can physically build that, we do think that that would be probably the intent. We have a lot of people moving into our community. We have a lot of growth. It's not going to do us any good to push that growth out to the next communities. And we're working on ways to find, working on how we can accommodate people moving into our community, as well as provide housing at a more affordable level than what is required in with only single family homes on those lots.
Thank you, Laura and Alan, for addressing some of Mr. George's comments and questions. Will, I see you've put another question in the chat, and we will get to that. There is one additional question that came to us during registration, and this question came from Jennifer Morrell. The question is, will the UDO impact whether there are still density bonuses for setting aside additional tree save area? And I think Jennifer is with us if we need additional context as well.
No, the short answer, and please correct me, Laura, if I'm wrong, is that we no longer will have density bonus for increased tree save area, but we have introduced a couple of options in our neighborhood 1 zoning districts. One is a conservation development option, which allows for smaller lots in exchange for increased open space, at least half of which has got to be tree saved. And we also have an option for, I'm scrolling now to get to it, voluntary mixed income residential development, which allows for development to use the next most intense zoning district in exchange for the provision of affordable housing, which essentially gives you more lots on the site than the zoning that was originally designated.
So this is Jennifer. I'm here. So with those two, is there a way to, I guess, kind of stack and combine those? So could you also use the next most intense zoning district, as well as use, I guess, any conservation subdivision rules in addition to the density bonus for housing? Or not, well, the next most intense zoning district, as well as I guess maybe reduced dimension, whatever reduced dimensional standards there are for sort of a conservation subdivision or or more tree save? I'm just trying to figure out, can you use both?
We don't think so. And
Okay,
with the conservation residential development option, you can reduce your lot size by 50%, as well as your minimum lot, your lot width and your minimum lot area. So that is going to get you a lot more, than moving to the next zoning district would. So I think from our thinking, that 50% is about as much as I think we think we should do.
Let me jump in. I believe we did change that so that you could use both. I think, Jennifer, we can come back and confirm with you, but I believe that was one of our late changes in this draft.
okay, thank you.
Thanks for jumping in, Laura, because I'm trying to read as we go along. I wasn't quite sure about that.
Thank you both for that, Alan and Laura. And as Laura said, Jennifer, we'll circle back to confirm that with you. Will Lovelet, excuse me, has put a question in our chat. It says, in the current draft of the UDO, there's a landscape buffer requirement between two properties, both zoned TOD, if one of the properties is in a neighborhood 2 place type. There's an exception for properties zoned N2C, which is less intensive than the TOD. Will exceptions to the landscape yard requirements be made for properties zoned TOD as well?
I'll take a first stab at that. We don't think that if you're in an N2 place type, you're probably not zoned TOD. So if properties both zone TOD, if one of the properties is given a neighborhood 2 place type, I think the short answer is, if you're currently zoned TOD, you would not be designated as a neighborhood 2 place type. And if I'm wrong about that, because I don't know the entire policy map, I don't know, Will, have they zoned properties, or rather, have they designated properties currently zoned TOD to neighborhood 2?
There are some examples. There are some neighborhood 2 place types that are in the Dilworth area, abutting South End. I can give you a couple address examples if you'd like.
Okay, so they're currently zoned TOD, but they're in a neighborhood 2 place type.
Correct.
Got it. I'm looking at the table for the required landscape yards by zoning district, and for a TOD.
As you look through that, Alan, Laura, is there anything that you can add to this?
The only thing I would say is that we will be going back through the community area planning and refining the policy map. So I think it'll be really important through that process to determine, was that very intentional that should be neighborhood 2, and then maybe the zoning is not appropriate, or was that just an oversight and the place type really should be one of the center's place type that would be appropriate for TOD. So I think that's really the question, is digging in during that community area planning process. And I think that would be probably helpful in that process to understand, what was the intent? Was there a strong intent with that designation, or was it just maybe an oversight and that was not the intent? Because we would look at, in the longer term, aligning the zoning with the policy map and the place type for each property.
So properties that were part of the TOD alignment rezoning, you would then potentially change them back to something that's not TOD if they were given a neighborhood 2 place type?
That is a possibility. I think that's why that community area planning process is going to be really important, to be involved in that and engaged in that. And for the community to say, at this point in time, let me go backwards. With TOD, it was based on older station area plans. Are those still valid? The properties in there, should that be adjusted or not? And that's what that community area planning process will do. I think ultimately we want our zoning to be consistent with our plans.
Thank you, Laura. Ellen, did you find anything that you wanted to add?
No, only that the way that the table currently reads, the required landscape yard table, if you're zoned TOD-NC or TOD-TR and you're abutting a neighborhood place type, it requires a Class C buffer, which is a 25-foot buffer, unless zoned N2C. Doesn't mention anything about being zoned a TOD developing against another TOD in a neighborhood 2 place type. Alternatively, if your development is TOD-UC or TOD-CC and you're abutting a neighborhood 2 place type, you're required to provide a Class B landscape buffer, landscape yard, which is a 10-foot wide yard, unless zoned N2C. Again, not mentioning TOD developing against TOD in a neighborhood 2 place type. So I'm not sure if that's something we need to look at more closely or if this is what the intent was.
Thank you, sir. We've got another question submitted by Mr. K. Doyle George, and I'm going to paraphrase this. So for a property in a campus place type and ostensibly with a campus zoning designation as well, can a campus be a single building or must there be multiple?
I think in terms of zoning, there is, well, if we look at in Article 7, the campus zoning district's purpose statement, where it lays out what the intent for each of those zoning districts is, it is generally talking about large scale campus development, and then gives any number of uses that could be provided for in that district. I don't see anything that would necessarily restrict a campus district to a single building. However, there are minimum district sizes. So for example, for the IC1 campus district, it's a minimum district size of 10 acres. For the IC2, it's 5 acres. For the Office Flex campus or OFC, it's 10 acres again. And for the research campus, it's 5 acres. So if you are, if the campus district meets that minimum lot size and only wants one building, I don't know specifically that there's anything that would restrict that from happening. I don't think that's the intent of the campus districts. But I also don't think that it prevents it. And Laura, if you feel any differently or can think of anything else about that, that's my read.
That's correct, Al.
Okay, I know, and Laura's having some construction, so that's the occasional hammering.
Yeah.
Moving to the next question that Will is asking, when is the community area planning process scheduled to take place? That's being done by our partners in planning and community planning section, but they do have a schedule. It's not off the top of my head, but I want to say it's going to take place over the next 3 years or so. I don't know which areas they're starting in. They do have a schedule that I don't know whether it's posted on their website yet or not, but I know that it will be commencing very soon if they haven't already started to do some preliminary work.
Say upcoming fall and winter, Alan. I'm sorry, I have a
Yes.
break in the hammering, so I can jump in before they start again. And I just want to say we will go back and look at that issue that about not listing all of the districts or how we need to handle that. So I don't want that to get lost in what and follow up that we'll be doing as far as that landscape yard relationship.
Yeah. Thank you. So yes, it's coming up. community area planning process will begin this fall.
Thanks, Alan. So that tolls us to this point for all of the questions and comments submitted through pre-registration and then what is currently in the chat. For those of you still with us, we've got just under 15 minutes remaining. I'd welcome you to put any additional comments or questions into chat, or also alternatively, if you'd like not to type it, if you can also use your raise the hand feature, and we can ask that you unmute if there's something additionally that you'd like to say. And again, as perhaps you guys are thinking through any last minute comments or questions, I do want to circle back up to the very top of the chat where Mariah Wozniak, one of our colleagues that is doing yeoman's work on the UDO project engagement side, has put an address at the charlotteudo.org website that is a listing of all the engagement events. Again, we've got this virtual conversation and this virtual update happening at midday today. This will again be held this evening from 6 to 7. We've got additional sessions for which under Mariah's post, I put the topics for Thursday sessions. And then also, please don't forget, we've got the open house at the Government Center tomorrow, to which we all heartily invite you to come out and see some of our staff as well as some subject matter experts for the different areas of the UDO. And Mariah has also put at the end of the chat, if you've not already, you have the opportunity to read more thoroughly the second draft of the UDO, as well as submit your comments on the second draft at that publicinput.com/Charlotte UDO address. So at this point, while we are beginning to wind down, I'll welcome anybody else on the UDO team that may have something they want to relay. I see our interim planning director, Allison Craig, is here. Allison, if you'd like to say anything, feel free. Any of the engagement staff, Mariah, Yolanda, please also the same.
Yep, Kevin, I think you covered it. We'd love to see you all out at our open house tomorrow if you're interested, or if you have more specific questions at one of our virtual office hours next week. But thank you all for being here. This meeting is recorded and will get posted along with our chat transcript on our website in the next few days.
Well, thank you all. I think with that, we'll conclude today's midday virtual update and give you 10 minutes back during your midday lunch hour. And we look forward to engaging with you some more in the future, as well as maybe seeing you at the open house. So please have a good rest of your day. Thank you all.